So, in this chapter, we've covered unemployment. We've talked about the different types of unemployment. So, we've talked about the natural unemployment and the cyclical unemployment. And within that natural unemployment, you're going to see different names pop up in the future. But every time that we talk about natural unemployment or the economy is producing at potential output or at full level of employment output, we're always referring to the same thing. There's a certain level of unemployment that is normal to have in an economy. There's different ways of making that number smaller, but just if you just think about people transitioning between jobs and so on and so forth, trying to find a better match, it's good that there's always some jobs available, and it's good that there's always some people looking and transitioning between all of that. It's not a bad thing. So there's the natural part of things, and there's the cyclical part of things, which we'll talk about more when we deal later on with recessions and situations where we're not producing as much as potential output. We also learn how to calculate unemployment rate, which is essentially the amount of unemployed people over the amount of people in the labor force. And the people in the labor force are people that are unemployed or employed. The problem is that once you give up on looking for a job, or once you decide to go back to school or everything else, you don't have to go on welfare necessarily, but if you leave the country, you stop looking for a job altogether, or you go back to school. In all of those instances, you're no longer part of the labor force because you're no longer employed, but you're no longer unemployed because you're not actively searching. So since it's that unemployed level over the labor force, there might be some of those people that disappear. And as those people leave, if they were initially unemployed and part of the labor force, they were counting. But once that number, since the numerator is smaller to the denominator, once the number disappears from the numerator and denominator, we could see the unemployment rate go down. If you just think of any other two numbers, you'll think about the same thing. If I take 3/4 and I take one off the numerator and the denominator, it's 2/3, then 1/2, and so on and so forth. So that number 0.75, which becomes 0.66, which becomes 0.5, becomes smaller and smaller. So people just leaving, getting discouraged, gives the impression that the unemployment rate is going down when it's not necessarily new jobs being created. So we've talked about some of those problems with measuring unemployment and taking those numbers for granted. So I hope that when you read the newspaper and you see what's going on in the economy before an election time, that you could more properly size the health of the economy based on the different numbers out there.